They guarded his head with swords, not because of enemies, but because a single slip of scissors could end the entire kingdom. This isn't just a story about royal hair. It's about fear, prophecy, and one man whose haircut decided the fate of millions. Stay till the end and hit subscribe, because once you hear what happened in the royal chamber, you'll never look at a throne the same way again. The room was silent, not because the king had spoken, but because the royal barber had just stepped in. His scissors glinted in the candlelight, and everyone in the chamber held their breath. The king sat upright, cloaked in deep velvet, his eyes fixed forward like stone. He didn't blink. He didn't smile, because he knew if the barber's hand slipped even a little, it wouldn't just be hair that fell to the floor. It could be blood. It could be war. And the man who cut too deep would never walk out of the palace again. Long before he wore a crown, the king's mother had whispered a warning into his cradle. Your hair holds your destiny. Let no blade near it without the star's permission. It sounded like superstition, a mother's fear, wrapped in old prophecy. But as the boy grew, strange things happened. Each time his hair was trimmed, a storm would strike. The kingdom that a trusted ally would betray him, or worse, a sibling would fall ill. Whispers began to spread that his hair was not just hair, but a divine tether between life, death, and power. By the time he became king, the warning had turned into law. No scissors touched his scalp unless the moon was right, the stars were aligned, and the high priest watched. But even then, accidents could happen. And accidents in a royal court were rarely forgiven. He was chosen with care, a quiet man, skilled with blades, loyal to the crown. He didn't speak much, didn't drink, didn't smile. He was the only one allowed to touch the king's hair. Every month, beneath a sky full of stars, he would step into the chamber with trembling hands, while priests chanted protection spells in dead languages. But one night, something went wrong. A sudden gasp, a single lock of hair fell to the marble floor. Cut too deep, the chanting stopped. The king's eye twitched. In the next morning, the barber was gone. No one saw him leave. No body was found, just his blade, floating in the palace fountain. From that day forward, the king's hair grew wild, untouched, unchallenged. He believed the curse had been triggered. And soon, they called it the tangled prophecy, an ancient warning carved into the walls of a forgotten temple. When the sacred strands fall in vain, the crown shall bleed. Superstition, maybe to others. But not to this king. He stopped appearing in public. When he did, his hair was tied back with gold thread, his crown placed carefully on top, never lifted, never adjusted. Not even by queens. Not even in prayer. Servants whispered that the crown had fused to his scalp, that removing it would tear skin from bone. And then the deaths began. His most trusted general collapsed at court, blood from his ears. A royal cousin found dead, hair knotted around his throat. Even the royal falconer vanished, leaving behind only a tuft of hair clenched in the bird's talon. Each time, the king's hair grew longer. Each time, he grew quieter, colder, closer to madness. No one dared mention the word cut. Not even in jest, not even behind closed doors. The royal barbers were dismissed permanently, their tools locked away in an iron chest sealed with the king's blood. But one night, the queen broke the silence. She entered the king's chambers with trembling hands, holding a single silver blade hidden beneath her robes. "My love," she whispered, "it's only hair." The king turned. His eyes were wild, unblinking. "Do you hear them?" he asked. "Each strand whispers now. Each one remembers." She reached for him. He screamed, a sound so sharp it cracked the candle glass. Guards rushed in, but the queen had already dropped the blade and fled. The next morning, she was gone. Her room stripped bare, her name erased from all royal records. And the king? He appeared at the next council with his hair tied in knots, a silent warning that not even love could touch what had cursed him. Behind the king's back, the council grew desperate. Trade routes were collapsing. Foreign ambassadors refused meetings, terrified of the rumors that the king's image, once fierce and golden, was now whispered across Europe as the tangled tyrant. So they gathered in the dead of night. Only candles. No scribes. No guards. Just trembling nobles and a single plan. We cut the hair, or we lose the crown. But who would do it? None dared face the king with scissors until one young maid, barely 16, stepped Forward, she had been raised in silence, trained to move without sound, that invisible in the palace halls. "I've washed his robes," she said. "He doesn't see me. That's why I can do it." And so, the fate of the kingdom rested in the hands of a girl no one ever noticed. The chosen night arrived. That rain lashed the palace windows. Thunder rolled over the hills. Inside the king's chamber, all was still, except for the sound of his breath. He lay asleep on a velvet bed, his golden hair spilling across embroidered pillows like a lion at rest. That the girl entered barefoot. No blade, just a pair of shears wrapped in silk. Her fingers trembled, but her face remained calm. Because failure didn't mean punishment. It meant death. That she crept toward him. Every creak in the floor sounded like a scream. Every breath from the king felt like a warning. And then she raised the scissors. That one strand. Two, she snipped like a ghost in the dark. But as the third lock fell, the king's eyes opened. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The weight of his gaze crushed the air from the room. The girl dropped the scissors, fell to her knees, and bowed so low her forehead touched the cold marble floor. A silence stretched like a blade across her throat. But the king didn't raise his voice. He slowly sat up, touched the shorn locks that now curled in his hand, and smiled, not with kindness, but with calculation. "You touched the crown before earning the right," he whispered. "Let's see what else you dare touch." That night, he summoned every noble, every rival, every whisperer of rebellion, and as the girl was brought forward, trembling in her nightgown, the king held up the hair she had stolen. "This," he declared, "is what betrayal begins as." Then he turned to his enemies. "And this," he said with icy calm, "is how betrayal ends." What he did next would seal his legend and her fate. No record survives of what happened to that girl. That not officially. That the scribes were ordered to burn the scrolls. The servants were rotated out. Even the stone where she kneeled was scrubbed, until no trace of her remained. But in whispered corners of the palace, an old tale lived on. They say she was taken to a chamber beneath the king's private wing. A room never opened again. They say her screams never echoed because the walls were too thick. And because the king was smiling. From that day forward, no one touched the king's hair. Not even his queen. That he wore it long, heavy, and wild. A warning, not a style. That each strand was a throne. That each curl, a cage. And with every step he took through court, people bowed not to the crown, but to the man whose hairline had once nearly started a war. Years passed. Kingdoms rose and fell. But inside the royal chambers, one object remained covered in velvet. A mirror. No one dared remove it. The king, once so vain about his image, refused to see his reflection. Because it wasn't the face he feared, it was the hair. It reminded him. Of disobedience, of a girl who asked the wrong question. Of how close he'd come to appearing weak. That he aged. Of course, the curls silvered, the edges thinned, but no blade touched them. Not even when his own son begged, softly, "Father, let me." The boy never finished that sentence, not after what happened to the last one. And so the king walked the halls like a haunted shadow, his tangled locks whispering of a forgotten rage, one no one dared wake again. Only one person still alive knew the full truth, a servant girl, now old, now silent, who had held the silver basin that day. That she had seen the trembling hands, the scissors that never closed, the eyes that begged for mercy. She had cleaned the blood. That not from a wound, but from the floor, where a man had knelt in fear and fallen in pieces. It was never written in royal records. The world believed the hairdresser was sent away. But she knew what the sound had been. Not a dismissal, but a punishment. She told no one, not even her grandchildren. But each night, before sleep, she whispered a prayer. Not for the king, but for the boy with scissors, who once tried to cut a crown and touched a curse instead. One winter night, the palace held a feast. Wine flowed. Musicians played. The king, aged now, stood tall but strangely quiet. As laughter echoed down the halls, he beckoned his youngest son to the fire. The boy knelt beside him, expecting affection, but what he heard froze his blood. "Swear to me," the king said, eyes fixed on the flames. "No scissors, no blades, not even for burial." The boy hesitated, then nodded, and the king, satisfied, touched his tangled hair, now gray, dry, and heavy, and muttered, "This is the price of ruling." Moments later, He rose and left. No one noticed the boy's tears or the fear behind them, because in that moment, the boy didn't see a king. He saw a prisoner of his own legend. Years passed. The king died as he had lived, cloaked in mystery and hair untouched. Even in death, no scissors dared approach him. His tomb was sealed with rituals. But rumors slipped through the cracks. Some said his soul remained tangled in his hair. Unable to rest, others swore his spirit appeared to barbers in their dreams, warning them, "Do not wake what the blade has buried." One royal attendant, brave or foolish, once tried to trim a single lock from the body. The next morning, he was found mute, eyes open, mind lost. No wound, no blood, just silence. That the crown passed to his son, but the curse, or the fear of it, passed. Two. And so the legend lived on, uncut, unbroken, untouchable. The new king, once that trembling boy by the fire, now wore the crown with caution, but the legacy of his father's hair haunted him like a shadow trailing every step. That for years, he followed the rule. No scissors, no blades, not even a comb dared touch his scalp. But on the eve of a great war, with his enemies closing in, he stood before a mirror and whispered, "Am I my father, or their king?" And with trembling hands, he reached for a blade. That the court held its breath. That the air thickened. One cut, then another. No thunder, no blood curse, just silence, and then freedom. He emerged from his chamber with a clean cut and clear eyes. And the people? They bowed, not because he had broken the curse, but because he had broken fear. Whispers of the cursed haircut faded over time, but the story survived, passed from nursemaids to nobles, from scroll to song. Not because it was about hair, but because it was about control. That a king's hair had once been used to cage him, until one dared to question the bars. And that's the quiet truth buried in palaces and war drums. Sometimes, the most dangerous rebellion is a simple choice made in silence. So the next time you hear of kings and crowns, remember this. It wasn't the sword, it wasn't the army, it was the comb.